It's kind of far off.
Okay, you're live.
Hey guys, so this is a special event. Thank all of you for the 12,000 subscribers. Doing a bit of a celebration today. Currently not in character of the quiet secret storyteller on the back alley streets of some unknown city. Currently just coming to you as Evan. The guy who wrote a lot of different stories that takes place in this world. Got a new story for you guys. It's not going to be it's not Yuka on this one, but it does take place in the world she inhabits. It's I won't go into too many details, but it takes place in a so there's that country Camden that I've talked about in there. It's takes place in their capital city, a very decadent metropolis known as Grail. This would take place about 100 years after Yuka, around that. It's actually a story I wrote a couple years ago, before any of this happened. So it's pretty raw writing. It's a little different on there. I go really hard on like kind of steampunk sounding dialogue, so it's if bear with me if it's a little goofy, feel free to roll your eyes, but I also love the story. This story in particular surrounds a character named Jack. Specifically, he's known as Jack of the Warrens on the streets of Grail. He's kind of a artful dodgery kind of character on there. Wrote a lot of short stories that take place in this world. Hope to expound on them in future. Yuka was just kind of the first one that I wanted to go up on. So may I just start this by saying thank you so much, any and all of you that have watched my previous episodes and are watching now or later on. I love doing this. I love writing these stories, and I look forward to so much more. So I'll get to the story. Yes, I will be doing some voices. The accents might sound goofy. I'm learning. I'll never get used to the smell of rats, Jack thought, as he hung from the cavern wall. He counted 37 of the little bastards scuttering under him in the dark. There was no sunlight to tell the time of day, but in the black of the warrens, you could still hear the 9 brass bells gonging in the passage of an hour through the thickly packed earth. The massive bells hanging from the 9 towers around the city of Grail were always too loud for Jack's liking. Better below, where the air is cleaner and the crushers don't bother to roam, as Aunt Vix would say. Jack loosened his grip on the leather straps that held him fast against the rock wall to give his aching arms a rest and hang free. The air may be cleaner, he thought to himself, but you can still smell the rats. Jack closed his eyes and thought of the deep pot of street fish stew that awaited him, if he did well today. He cursed himself as he heard his empty belly groan in pleasure and longing at the thought. The sound reverberated off the walls in the extreme silence of the cavern and made it sound like all around like some great beast was angry. Cripes, did you swallow a tunnel toad in your sleep there, Jack? Flick hissed from his hiding spot. The fat, broad-shouldered boy was stuffed comically down one of the tiny crags a few feet under where Jack hung. Sounded like the pit runners on harvest day. Stick giggled from his own crouching spot behind the rocks. Get low and shut up, both of you, Jack whispered angrily. You want to slack up this whole thing? If we flub today, the Baroness will have Gregor fill our bellies with knives instead of stew. Those names and the promise of death brought silence from the 2 boys below. Stupid as his yardies were, Jack knew they would never cross the Baroness. Jack heaved himself up against the slanting wall once more, holding tight to the leather straps that had been bolted into the wall of rock. He felt a familiar ache in his arms and his legs begin. He closed his eyes and repeated the distracting words in his head. Black is bright, dark is true, in the red they come for you. Hold tight, Jack, don't show fear, you'll smell blood when they are near. Close your eyes, dark is right. You'll be safe, lost in the night. Aunt Vix had whispered the rhyme 1,000 times over the sleeping heads of her child boarders, In the night, she had room to sleep Jack and his yardies. She'd been she'd been the one to give Jack his name all those years ago. She said the rhyme was a prayer, a sort of blessing, to be said when those you cared for slept. Jack carried it with him every day he went into the Warrens. He was 3 times into the rhyme when he began to hear the creak of wagon wheels. There was rarely much difference in the Warrens when one opened their eyes. Open was just as dark as closed. But now, after the creak reached his ears, Jack could begin to see the soft ghost of a glimmer of red in the distance. His yardies didn't make a sound as the creak grew louder and the red light grew brighter. Every one of them knew that the score of today's haul and what it would cost to miss it. I'm telling you, Mac, there's heavy weight over the air, like some filthy magus has put an enchantment over the city. The Dregtown accents were unmistakable. The man speaking had a gravelly, coughing tone of a miner. Come off it, Danny, said the partner, leading the blinded mule through the tunnel by the bit in his mouth. Jack could smell salty, rancid sweat on the mule and the stink of coal on the men. When is the bloody damned air not heavy in your neck of the city? That's steel smoke in your lungs, not some Australian's curse, you damned oaf. I saw one, you know, the man called Danny said, their voices loud enough to hear without straining now. In the lower city by the Greybeard Tavern on Murder Turf. Wore this great silvery cloak and had night blue hair and all. Man or woman? The other man asked. Woman, I think. Sod, you can never bloody tell with them, can you? Bet you can when the great big cloak is off, the other said. Jack could hear a smile in his words. You're a damned heretic, man, if you get yourself hard for a scheming magus. Danny grumbled in disgust in his voice. One of the men, probably Danny, turned and spat. Jack watched the 2 men silently as the solitary red lantern hanging off a pole on their wagon neared them. He took several slow, deep breaths, slowing the pace of his heart. He closed his eyes again. Wait for the bell, boys. Wait for the bell. The blinded mule strode evenly closer to them, led by the other man. Jack's heart softened for the animal. Fear not, love. We'll not be hurting you when all this starts. Jack closed his eyes one last time as the wagon was brought under his hiding spot on the wall. Wait for the bell. The little cat bell, attached to the twine tied across the tunnel, gave a tinkling ring, and the yardies moved. Flick dove from his hiding spot. His hand shot out and swiped the lantern from its hook on the pole. Before the 2 men could react, Flick threw the lantern hard down back the way they had come from the tunnel. The light around them was lost as the lantern cracked against the wall and the gas flame died against the rock. Deep damn them, who goes? Danny called out. Even in the dark, Jack knew the sound of a long blade being pulled from its sheath. His eyes, long trained in the black of the tunnels, saw the 2 men waving about with knives and cudgels in their hands. Good on you, Flick. Now Stick. Stick moved like lightning in the dark. He kept low, like the little gremlin he was, and weaved past the legs of the stationary mule. The blinded animal smelled the boy but gave no reaction. Little animals, other than them, were common in the black of the tunnels. Stick slid under the wheels of the wagon, and the 2 men waved about blindly, cursing and promising murder. I'll be feeling the guts of any who come near me, I swear it. There was no fear in Danny's voice, only anger. Jack watched as Stick slid his rat-skinning dirk from his boot. Quick as a tunnel adder, Stick lashed out with his dagger, 2 precise strikes at their legs. With angry yelps of pain, the 2 men went down, and Jack let go of the straps finally and dropped. His muscles rejoiced. He landed hard on the wood and cloth boxes piled tightly in the wagon. Even with his eyes, it was impossible to tell which package was theirs. He felt around, remembering the Baroness's description. A brass lock that looks like a spider. Jack felt around desperately. Danny and the other men were now swinging so violently around on the ground with their weapons that they were rocking the wagon. Thieving bastards, the other man called out. Jack knew that Stick's rat skinner was not enough to keep the men on the ground long, and they were not told to slit any throats this time. He resisted the urge to reach for his own small blade, kept at the tight sheath at his back. He felt around, his heartbeat rattling in his rib cage. He felt the lock. It was circular and smooth in its feeling, with 4 little leg points on either side. Jack did not hesitate. He heaved the small chest up, marking its weightiness. "Cat!" he yelled the code. Flick ran forward from his hiding spot. Jack threw the chest to him. The strong boy caught it with ease and cried out as one of Danny's blind swipes from the ground caught him in the back of the leg. Jack moved. He jumped lightly from the wagon and sent a hard kick to the chest of Danny. The man coughed violently and fell back hard on the tunnel ground. "Come on, you lot!" Jack called out. He grabbed Flick under his arm and shoved the older boy forward. Flick cried out in pain again, but kept moving, holding the chest tightly to his belly. Stick was already 20 paces down the tunnel. Before passing the wagon, Jack had a reckless thought and slid out his dirk from his back sheath. The nightly honed steel cut through the reins of the blinded mule like hotcake. The animal bristled at the movement, but clopped forward. Jack knew that it would find its way back through the tunnels better than the man who led it. He smiled and sprinted down the tunnel after his yardies and away from the cursing, threatening tunnel runners. Jack took less than 20 paces to outdistance the other 2 boys. There was not a faster warren rat alive in these tunnels. He would have left them long behind, but kept close enough that his yardies would not lose him in the dark. Flick was slow on his feet, and Stick was born bright, so his eyes had not yet adjusted to tunnel life. As yet. "Tarry a while, Jack," Flick called out, his lungs wheezing with every step. "We need a breather soon." "You need a breather," Stick called out. "Sod off, Stick." Jack could tell that Flick was waning. 3 more turns, then light, he called out over his shoulder. "Deep blessed," Flick coughed. The 3 turns led them to a tunnel with a steep incline, followed quickly by a set of steep stairs of wood and packed earth. Jack had worked on the youth crew that had packed and cut these stairs in the tunnel. He knew them well. "Damn them, these stairs are the worst bit." Flick sounded near death by the time they reached the top. "Shade now, boys," Jack called out. He had already slid his own tinted goggles of cracked red glass and cheap tan leather out of his satchel and put them on. The brightness of the city of Grail above was not to be underestimated. They were 4 steps from light when they slid their goggles on. Once out of the tunnel, the world changed. Gone was the quiet, cool dark of the Grail Warrens. Returned was the hot steel, cold brass, and choking soot of Draketown. Sound blasted them as hard as the light did when the 3 emerged from the Warren hole. Wagons pulled by unblinded mules and steam-powered road freighters whirled past in the worn cobbles of the lower streets. Men and women by the tens of thousands lumbered, marched, or rode past to the morning's trade or the day's hustle. Second shift was just about to start for the fireglass miners. 20 or so men, turned red and black from the soil and soot of the tunnels they cleaved, walked lazily past the Warren opening. None seemed to take notice of the 3 Warren boys. A few were already swaying from their morning guzzle of black gin before going into the mines. Others were hacking and coughing as often as they drew breath. A shiver went up Jack's spine as he watched the group of miners head for the railcar station. Never in my life, never will that be me, he thought to himself. "Pick up your feet, boys. The Baroness gets her fix before 4th bell." Jack shifted his grip on the chest. The contents felt heavier after the long climb to the surface. Next to the entrance of the tunnel, under 2 rocks and a plank of wood, Jack found a heavy satchel he had stashed the night before. Looking around to make sure the street bustlers could not see their prize, he stashed the chest within and beckoned his yardies down the cobbles toward Fleet Street. "Come on, lads. It's 10 blocks to the Fifes." Fife's Bazaar was a rancid, bloated gut of Draketown. It was a vast lake of tents, huts, shops, cook fires, hustlers, cutters, and trade, all carved into the base of a high wall of the volcanic bowl that held the city of Grail. Balconies with wide canopies of 1,000 faded colors were built into the high volcanic wall, overlooking the rest of the bazaar and Draketown. The smell of shit, spice, meat, and sweat would be overwhelming to a newcomer moments after they had passed the first tent. There was a grease-stained man who looked to be wider than he was tall, calling out from his food stand. A woman next to him screeched out the prices of her beads and jewelry. "Sausages! Clean dog, cat, and rat, cooked with spices from the higher city. Best in the bazaar. Beads, brass, bronze, and leather. Finest in the bells. Miner's ration coin accepted. Oi there, little boys. Want to earn a miner's copper? Jack ignored them all. Their harmony was all too familiar to him now. He heard the heavy breathing of his yardies close behind him. There now, Jack. Sausages, Flick called out. No, Flick, Jack said over his shoulder, shoving past the man, knocking cheap moon dials. But we've got here early, and do you have any coin in your pocket? Since when do we need coin to swipe a bite? Jack sighed and turned around. You want to lose a hand to the Baroness stealing some bloody rat sausage? Go on, then. But you'll be a worn yardie alone, and that's worth about a 3-day life in the bazaar. Flick grimaced. Jack knew that the large boy was softer than he looked. He felt his frustration ebb. Swallowing his impatience, Jack laid a hand on the taller boy's shoulder. We'll get a bite we earned, finally, when we get this chest to the Baroness. We're almost there, my boy. Best move your hand from there, Jackie boy, Stick said, laying his chin on Flick's other shoulder. I'm betting Flick is a few seconds away from making it lunch. Jack laughed, and Flick shrugged both of them off, annoyed. Sawed off, the lot of you. Jack laughed and gave Stick and Flick a shove. Come on, Warren Rats, to the day's trade and to Aunt Nix's stew. The market trails in the bazaar were shaped like a massive spider. If you looked at it from above on one of the shop balconies built into the cliff wall, they twisted and curved around the shop, huts, tarps, and tents, but all roads led to the center, to the black sails. Jack turned the dusty corner around a small bronzesmith, tinkering with pocket knives, when he laid eyes upon the dark, waving towers of the Baroness's market palace. The Black Sails, as it was known, was a palace of black silk and iron. At the center of Fife's Bazaar, if the wind held still, it looked like a small fortress made of stone. Though when a stiff breeze hit the air, its walls and towers waved all about, making it all look like a madman's fever dream. Jack felt the chest weigh heavily in the satchel held across his shoulder. He shifted the strap to ease the soreness and stepped forward. The entrance of the Black Sails was made of an ancient, rusted stone and steel portcullis from the Grail city of old. Sitting lazily at the base of it were near a dozen fighting men, armed to the teeth with clubs, half-swords, and pikes. All wore the livery of the Baroness. Their coats were drab, faded tan, but each held the black symbol of a gear, like from a great clock, but with 8 spindly legs hanging limply off of it. Aye, aye there, Jack, called a voice to the left of the guarded gate. Jack turned, his blood running cold at the poisoned tone he knew too well. Hello there, Gregor. Jack looked up to see the brigadier of the Baroness's street army. The tall, wickedly muscled man looked to be made only of corded flesh and scars, save for his face. Gregor would have been a very handsome man if he had not had his nose sawn from his face during a turf war the Baroness held with the North Dock Breakers 10 years before. The rest of his face was framed with greasy, golden hair, the back of which was held back with a strip of pall leather. The coat that held the Baroness's symbol had the arms torn out, bearing for all the world the scars Gregor had taken for his master. Who would tell any? At his side was an older model of a dragoon's broadsword. According to Gregor, who would tell any that would listen, he had taken it off a dead Leonot he had killed in a duel over a game of pitch glass. A brace of curved skinning knives also lined the belt at his hip. Jack eyed the knives, hearing screams from a distant memory. We've come ahead of schedule with what was tasked and what was promised. Jack unslung the shoulder strap and held out the satchel. He said the words he'd spoken many times already. We humbly present for the Baroness her prize. Gregor smiled. As he did, the deep hole in his face curved wickedly. It was to be delivered before second bell, the way I remember it, Gregor said, his hand resting lazily on the handle of one of his skinning knives. Jack heard his yardies shift uncomfortably behind him. He felt anger rise in his belly, but swallowed it down. You'll find my red stamp on the task of the ledger. Before 3 bells was her order. The ledger, eh? Since when can Warren Rats read, then? Best be sure, Jack, you know that the Baroness takes from liars. An eye for a lie, she says. And I'd still be a nose up on you, bastard, Jack thought. He bowed his head again. I cannot read, but when the Baroness speaks, I remember. Gregor chuckled. Well then, I suppose we'll hear from her what was true. He patted his skinning knives and turned to the men watching by the gate. Carl, open the gate. Call one of the boys to lead these yardies to the garden. The Baroness will be taking her tea now. Jack heard Flick stifle a fearful groan behind him. He himself felt a sickly feeling rise in his own gut. Of all the dark corners of the Baroness's silk palace, the garden was the worst. He sighed as the gates opened and stepped forward. The Baroness was from one of the conquered provinces of Yoked, a smattering of hard-lived, icy islands somewhere far in the north. Jack knew little of any world outside of the cliff walls of Grail, but the Baroness liked to talk of her lands to those who served her. Like Dregtown, her islands were a beating heart of desperation and competition, to hear her tell it. The Baroness's favorite way to describe her home was, In Yoked, we have two things in abundance, fish and enemies. There we ate both. As Jack walked through the gate of the Baroness's palace of black sails, he caught a strong whiff of something well cooked and heavily spiced. His stomach growled longingly. It smells like fish, this time anyway. Near all of the wealth in Fife's Bazaar could be found in the Baroness's black sails. Every shopkeeper, tradesman paid her a percentage, and every cut-purse thief gave her half their earnings. With a crumbling stone gate, the black cloth walls were lined with a web of wooden beams and folding screens that held a loud collection of tapestries, colored glass, gold and brass trinkets, and pelts from 1,000 far-off lands. A dozen more fighting men, bearing the spider gear badge of the Baroness, were lined haphazardly amidst the cloth walls. In one corner of the tent, an elderly man with long gray hair and cracked teeth labored tirelessly in a ring of tables filled with stoves, knives, and cookpots. There was a huge cauldron in the middle of the ring with a creamy gold stew that looked to be near boiling. It was from there that the tantalizing scent of fish and spices came from. A boy, younger than Jack or his yardies, came to this old man with a tray that was already holding a steaming kettle and a small plate of what looked to be meats and olives. The old man delicately poured a generous amount of the stew into a brass bowl and set it on the tray. The boy bowed and wordlessly brought the tray to a red cloth flap on the far side of the tent. Follow him, then. Gregor nodded to the retreating boy. Jack and his yardies followed. Through the tent flap was the Baroness's garden and the Baroness herself. To a passerby who had never seen a half-flayed corpse on the cobblestones of the bazaar, the Queen of Fife would appear to be a washerwoman, or a cook in one of the lower-level pots of Dregtown. Her face was handsome, her eyes serene. She had the thick jaw and high cheekbones common among the people of her area of Yoked. Despite the decadence of her home, she wore no trinkets or vibrant colors. The clothes on her back were simple wool, the color of dun and snow. Around her head she wore a simple scarf tied in a way to keep her hair from her eyes. Around her eyes were smile lines that Jack had heard her laugh like a woman who had led a quiet life. She sat in a small circular clearing at a small table in her garden. The table was under a white drape awning. Outside of the clearing, thousands of the same type of thin tree, covered in thick, drooping vines, surrounded her. The greens were so bright that Jack felt himself squint behind his goggles. Greenery was not something common seen in the high streets. As far as Jack knew, the Baroness had the only garden in Dregtown. Ah, sweet Jackie, come with the day's bounty. The Baroness waved them over. There was another sitting before her in the garden clearing. The man had skin that looked like sanded marble. Heavy muscles bulged in a tight blue-gray military-style uniform. He had a leather harness attached to a thick belt around his waist that held an iron-banded club on one side and a crusher's saber on the other. Jack sucked in a breath. He heard Stick curse behind him. Damn it all, it's a bloody jailer, he muttered. The man in uniform had his back to them all. He took a sip from a small teacup sitting at the Baroness's table. The Baroness said something to the man. Jack could not hear the words. The man nodded and stood, turning. The massive man stood taller than even Gregor. Under one arm, he carried a steel-plated plinth helmet of the Dregtown jailers. The jailer's head was shaved. He looked to be about 40 summers old. Between his eyes and across his forehead, the man bore the facial scars typical of people from his homeland. The jailers were the law, as far as the high streets were concerned, in Grail. Warden Yevon and I were just discussing the rising rate of smuggling rings in the Warrens, Jack, the Baroness called out. He believes that smugglers in the dark tunnels are becoming more bold, more dangerous. What would you say, my boy? The warden stopped and looked down hard at Jack. The boy stood his ground, but felt ice in his gut as the dark eyes of the lawman bored into him. Jack noticed 4 finger bones, gilded in gold, sewn into the right epaulette of his uniform. I believe the world below is not the world above and should be walked through with caution. The warden walked past without a second glance at the boys from Jack's word from the Warrens, but the Baroness gave a hearty laugh. Ah, yes, boy, yes, you are right. Please, please, come and sit. Jack, Stick, and Flick all walked forward, but the Baroness held up a hand. Oh, no, not your little band there. They can take their stew from Gren at his stove. You, Jack, come enjoy yours with me. Jack turned to his yardies, who looked at him like they did not want to leave him alone with the Baroness. He gave them both a nod and a smile. Save some bread for me, if there is any. Dismissed, Flick and Stick hurried off towards the ring of cook tables. Jack walked over to the Baroness. As soon as he neared the small woman, Jack could smell the sharp tang of sweetened vinegar, salty meats, and freshly made fig jam. Jack looked at the small chair the jailer had just vacated. He looked at the Baroness, who nodded. Jack took his seat, and the Baroness pushed the steaming plate of stew she had been brought from the servant boy towards him. Eat, Jack, eat your skin and bones. Hurry now, or you'll start to look like someone from my country. Jack leaned forward and inhaled the buttery, rich scent of fish broth, onions, and pipe crab. Unable to contain himself any further, he grabbed up the spoon next to the bowl and dug in. It was his first meal in 3 days. Jack felt his head swim at the richness of the stew. The salty, scalding liquid sent ecstasy through his chest and up his fingertips. The stew was stuffed with a white pipefish and crab meat, but it also held onions, carrots, spice, and leeks, all contraband this side of the high streets. Jack groaned deeply, incapable of holding back his expression. The Baroness smiled, taking a delicate bite from an olive from her own plate. That's it, lad. You'll feel the magic in a full belly, the power and satisfaction. My people know this feeling well. With a silk napkin, she wiped her mouth and gestured for another servant to refill a wine cup at her side. Once filled to the brim, the Baroness took a long, slow sip. She nodded at Jack. You lads can't operate above the ground without those, yes? She indicated Jack's goggles. Jack nodded, wiping steam from the stew off of his lens. Too bright above, Mum. During the day, anyway. Do your best deeds in the dark, do you? She said, plucking a fig from the jam with a spoon. Me and my arties. Yes, Mum. The Baroness nodded and beckoned someone behind Jack forward. Jack took another bite of stew and turned to see Gregor striding up with his arms laden with the chest that he, Flick, and Stick had labored for that morning. Wordlessly, his eyes leveling on Jack, the cutter captain set the chest on the table. Next to the chest, Gregor set 3 small iron tools that Jack could not quite see. Your lot. You room with Aunt Vix in the club pit, yes? Jack nodded, his mouth too full of fish and onions to say, Yes, Mum. A fine choice of bed, that, if you don't mind the sound of ghouls clawing at the tunnels around you. Jack shook his head, taking in 3 more bites of stew. He spoke in between them. Aunt Vix keeps the ghouls out. They don't go down her tunnel. The Baroness smiled. She tilted her head slightly, fingering the tassels of her headscarf around her shoulder. Still, you'd never get me sleeping in a damned pit, boy. I've slept on floating ice, while massive black-skinned lurkers swam around me, and I'd still call that my bed before sleeping down a warren. Jack looked up from the stew finally, not knowing how to answer, he shrugged. Better than sleeping in the streets. I'll have my boots gone and my throat cut before the morning light reached me. You could sleep here, boy, the Baroness smiled wildly, her lips stretching wide around the yellow cracked teeth. I've many a bed under these sails, save for all who wear the gear crawler badge. Jack felt a small pit in his stomach. Never say no to the Baroness. The word will die in your throat along with you, he knew. Jack swallowed his last bite of stew. The Baroness nodded to the bowl. You like it? Have another. Have 3 a day for as long as you live. Just live here. Work only for the bazaar. Work only for me. The Baroness folded her fingertips and stared over them at Jack, falling silent. She waited for an answer. The boy looked up from the still steaming, empty bowl of stew. One wrong word, just one, and I'll feel the cold of Gregor's knives. Jack shook his head. I'm no capper, Mum. I don't use sword or club. Only blade I've got is for cutting purses. Besides, I'm too small. The Baroness leaned forward. I don't just need cappers, Jackie boy. My boys can thieve as well as cut, but you've got more spark in you than the other rats in the warrens. Your yardies follow you close, but you've a mind for when to take and when to wait. Jack wiped his mouth with the back of his coat sleeve, saying nothing. The Baroness grinned wider and began fumbling with tools Gregor had brought on the chest's lock. The silence grew between them, and Jack began looking around her garden. The midday breeze was winding through the thick vines and trees around them. Do you enjoy the look of my sang-root, boy? The Baroness said, not looking up from the chest. Jack was feeling somehow bolder with a full belly, and sat up straighter in his seat as he said, They're beautiful sights, with terrible secrets. The Baroness gave a derisive laugh. Aye, that is true. She looked up from the chest. I planted each one myself, though Gregor helped a little. He held them down? Jack asked, his boldness slipping away like dust in a breeze. The Baroness nodded, squinting down at the chest. The seed needs to be put under a still beating heart to be able to fully take root. In my country, this was done to prisoners. In my bazaar, it is done to traitors and debtors. A strong wind shook the dripping vines and branches around them. Jack could smell copper in the air. His body shivered. He could almost hear screams in the breeze. A small metallic click brought Jack out of his thoughts. The Baroness gave a satisfied sigh and opened the chest. She looked at Jack. Talking of debtors, I have a very wealthy man in the high streets who is in a great deal of debt to me. His family is quite influential in the upper parts of Grail. His father is a Leonot with 2 full prides under his command, and his brother is one of the top declarants of the Labour Party. But this fool finds his thrills in one of my gambling dens, so... The Baroness took a sip of wine and looked hard at Jack. I was told by some of my friends in the high streets that this fool was trying to leave the city without anyone knowing. I ask you, Jack, she leaned forward, what do you do with a man from a powerful family who won't pay his debts? Jack breathed deeply, then gave a slight shrug. The Baroness smiled. She began removing items one at a time from the chest, setting them on the table. The items seemed odd to Jack. They did not look like they would merit much security. Before him was what appeared to be a small bow of faded pink ribbon, a lock of dry, sand-colored hair, and a tiny, bejeweled rattle that looked to be a richly adorned children's toy. Lastly, the Baroness removed a small, leather drawstring bag. This, she opened and spilled its contents out onto the table. They looked like small fragments of pearls or white stones. It was a moment before Jack realized he was looking at baby's teeth. You take what they will truly miss. In this case, it is a memory of someone lost. The Baroness laid her finger on the spilled teeth, almost lovingly. She looked up at Jack. Thank you for bringing this to me, boy. It was a bowl of stew well earned. Jack could not remove his eyes from the teeth. He thought of the child they must have belonged to. He thought of the hair, the ribbon. What have I done? He thought to himself. Somewhere above them, the bells began to ring. The Baroness frowned. Reaching into her pocket, she removed a silver-plated day winder and looked at the moving hands on it. The bell ringers are half an hour early today. What is... The Baroness's voice trailed off as she looked up. By Bloodvax's heart, she pointed, and Jack turned his gaze upwards to look. He saw massive shadows silhouetted by the sun being lowered from the sky. Airships, he wondered. Jack had never seen true Drakenstein airships outside of the drawn images from their recruitment posters around the bazaar. Gregor came running back from inside the black sails. My lady, we need to get you below. I don't know. The Baroness waved him off. Wished quicker. They're lowing towards the high streets. She licked her lips nervously. Call the lads, all of them, armed to the teeth. I want the bazaar shut down and secure before any of those airships make land. If any of the shopkeepers give you guff, slit them. Gregor nodded and ran back inside, barking orders. Jack watched him go, then turned back to the Baroness. Her eyes were resting on his. I suggest you and yours get back below the tunnels, Warren Rat, and think on my offer. She began scooping up the baby teeth and returned them to the chest. I'll be in touch, boy. With a wave, she dismissed him. Wasting no time, Jack leapt off the chair and ran back to the black sails to find his yardies, trying not to think of trees, seeds, or teeth. Yeah, I know it's kind of dark, but it's I got a whole story with it. It's not just it's not just a short story. It's meant to be that's meant to be kind of the inciting incident. So that will be one of the next stories to follow once the Nightheart has reached her ultimate conclusion. I just want to say again that I love doing this. I've thoroughly enjoyed being able to read you guys these stories, and they've been really fun to write. I get inspiration, and I work with a friend on kind of figuring out what the world would be like on this. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without my lovely Raven. If you come say hi and just look at the crowd real quick. She's what makes this possible. I have absolutely no social media or tech stuff, so she is what keeps this running. She is very much the lifeblood of Winter Rose Tales. So I just want to say thank you guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll do another one of these when we hit a landmark. I'll have more Jack stories by then, or I might hit up a different chapter from a different part of the same world. Until then, it's been my pleasure, and I hope you guys are enjoying the stories. So look forward for more.